Here we go with section 2.4 part 1, linear functions and slope. First thing we want to look at is a way to graph lines using intercepts, and so before we can do that we need to make sure we understand what I mean by intercepts. So we've got a picture here and some definitions. The x-intercept is where the line goes through the x-axis, which is the horizontal axis, or this axis right here. That's the x-axis. The y-intercept is where the line goes through the y-axis, and the y-axis is this one that goes vertically. And so if we can figure out what these 2 points are, which is really easy to do in some cases, then we just draw the line that goes between them and we've graphed our line. An example of that is example 1, use intercepts to graph the linear function. So the way this works is we're going to use what's called the Coverup method. And so what we're going to do is we're going to cover up the y, and not just the y, but whatever else is with the y. So this part right here. When I want to find the x-intercept, I cover up the y, and I need to write out what's left. 2x equals 6. Well, if 2x equals 6, I can divide both sides by 2. Means my x-intercept is at 3. So on my graph at 3, I can put a dot, because that's where my x-intercept is. Then what I do is to find the y-intercept, I cover up the x. So that gives me negative 3y equals 6. Divide by negative 3 on both sides. I get y equals negative 2. So on the y-axis at negative 2 is where I'd put my point. And so because those all divided evenly and we didn't get fractions, that was a really easy way to graph it. If you end up trying to do that and you end up with fractions, then that's where it's not quite so easy as the other way, which we'll talk about in our next section. So I need to draw the line that goes between these. This line may or may not be beautifully drawn, so please forgive me. It's hard to draw lines on an iPad. So there's my line that goes through the x and y intercept we found. The other thing in this section we want to look at is the slope. You've been doing slope for a while up to this point, and so on your notes page you need to draw these lines. And what's important here on the positive and negative slope is that a positive slope rises from left to right and a negative slope falls from left to right. So you don't have to draw the exact same line as what I have. You just need to make sure that your positive slope goes up from left to right, your negative slope goes down from left to right. The zero slope gives us a horizontal line. Remember, horizontal is like the horizon. That's the way you can remember which way is horizontal and which way is vertical. And then this undefined slope is vertical. And these words here tell us how this relates to the number that we find from this formula. If the number we find from this formula is positive, that means it has a positive slope. That means it rises. If you get a negative, then it falls, and so on. So some examples of this. So I'm going to just jot down real quick the slope formula so we all see it. You already have it written down or whatever. So we need to label our points, x1, y1, x2, y2. What that's saying is that this is the x and y of our first point, this is the x and y of our second point. That's what that notation means. So if I fill this in, y2 is 8 minus y1, which is 5, over x2, which is 4, and minus x1, which is 3. We just need to do the top to the bottom, see if we can simplify. 8 minus 5 on top is 3, 4 minus 3 on bottom is 1. That simplifies to just be 3. And then in our instruction, it asks us to indicate whether the line through the point rises, falls, is horizontal, or is vertical. Well, since this is a positive slope, if you look back at the previous thing we did, that means that this slope rises. Next, label your points. And so if we fill this in, 6 minus a negative 2 would be y2 minus y1. Now notice there I have 2 negatives in a row, so remember that's where you do whatever you learned back in the day, make those positive. There's always something that people say like bang bang or ching ching or whatever, I don't know, but because those are both negatives we can change it to positive. On the bottom we do 3 minus 3. So 6 plus 2 on top is 8, 3 minus 3 on the bottom is 0. We are not allowed to divide by 0, so this is undefined. Okay, if we try to divide by 0 on slope, and we can't, so it's undefined. If we look back at our slopes on the previous thing, an undefined slope ends up being a vertical line. And here, you end up with 5 minus 5 on the top, negative 1 minus 2 on the bottom. So that's 0 over a negative 3. We are allowed to have 0 over something. That gives us 0. And if we look, we have a 0 slope, and so that's a horizontal line. The last thing we're doing is looking at lines and see what the slope is. Remember that slope is rise over run. And so for L1, which is the orange line, I want to look at how much my graph is rising and running, and that's my slope. So if you start at the left point, to get to the right point, you actually have to go down 2. So it rises negative 2. Then you'd run to the right, which is the positive direction, so you run 6. It's positive 6 because we're going toward the positive numbers. So negative 2 over 6 simplifies because I can divide the top and the bottom by 2 to negative 1/3. So that'd be our slope. On the blue line, if I start at the left point, I would go up 2, so that's positive 2 for my rise, right 1, so that's positive 1 for my run, 2 over 1, which equals 2.